I'm Dave, and this is Brighter Rays. We're looking at Proverbs. We've been in the book of Proverbs for quite a while now, and we're looking at these kind of one-off Proverbs and seeing what kind of wisdom we can glean from these things. And today I pulled together some Proverbs that are all about children. Really, the nature of children is what we're talking about. Because there's a whole other set of Proverbs that talk about how to train up a child, how to discipline them, how to educate them. And there's Proverbs about that, but there's also Proverbs about just who children are. And we get two types of children, just like we get two types of adults. There's foolish people and there's wise people. And so there's those two categories there that we find quite often. And that's what we see in Scripture about children as well, that children can be foolish and children can be wise. There can be wise children. Remember, wisdom starts with the fear of the Lord. And so we have some children that fear the Lord and genuinely do. They love God. They're Christians. They are saved, regenerated believers in the Lord. And they can be wise. And then there's lots of children that aren't saved and are on, the road to hell. And they're foolish. And they don't know God. They have no fear of God. And they can rebel just as vehemently as an adult. And so we're going to take a look at that. Now, today's study, we're going to look at the foolish child. And so I have some Proverbs that talk about foolish children and how they affect their parents. And but there are two headings of my message for this week, and that's foolish and wise. But before we go any further in our study, we must come to understanding that children, even little children, can be foolish or wise. Remember that we have been learning that when the Proverbs speak of the fool, it means that they have no fear of the Lord. They're in rebellion against him, and they have no repentance in their lives. Since this is the case, we must say that most children are born fools. Unless God regenerated their hearts from birth, these little bundles of joy are fools. Now, God can do that, and God has done that. I think John the Baptist was regenerated in the womb. He had a heart that loved the Lord from the very beginning. Maybe even Jeremiah, who was called from his birth. And so, were these two, does that mean that they were regenerated? It seems like it. And so, can God do that? Of course he can. Now, the usual way that plays out, especially that someone is older, it is through faith, right? That shows up in the person's life, that their heart is regenerated, then they're saved through faith. They believe in the things of God, and that changes their lives, and they become wise. Some people, they can start doing that from the very beginning. Day one that they're out of the womb, they are wise. They're fearing the Lord, and they're just growing in wisdom. Is that possible? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, does that happen to everyone? No. A lot of us are born fools, and then we actually have to be changed sometime in our lives, and then you become wise. So I was like 8 years old when that happened. And I've hopefully been growing in wisdom since then. But if most of the children in the world are born fools, then we should hear wisdom teaching us about foolish children. It should tell us about that, right? Because if that's the case, then we should hear that children can be fools. And that's, in fact, what we have here. The Proverbs just assume this truth. It assumes the truth that you can have a child that's born a fool or a child that's, has wisdom. It assumes that both are possible for children. So let us look at several of these passages that teach us that children can be fools and what the consequences of that foolishness is. So first consequence of a foolish child is that they bring grief to their parents. Proverbs 10:1. A foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. All right, so we got Proverbs 10:1. A foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. 17:21. He who sires a fool gets himself sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. So Proverbs 17:21. He who sires a fool gets himself sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. Then a few verses later in 17:25, it says, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. So 17:25 says, a foolish son is a grief to his father and a bitterness to her who bore him. So there you go. You got 10:1, 17:21, and 17:25. Those are the three we're going to focus in on. There's more, but those are the three I've chosen. And so we see here there's an uncertainty of earthly joys that comes with this. We often trust in earthly objects, don't we? When we're looking for joy, we trust in the things that are around. We trust in things that we can see. So earthly things are often expected sources of joy, right? So if I, been looking for my dream house and I finally find it and I buy it and I get to move in, we expect that house to be a source of joy. But it is unreliable because why? Because it's a house, and anyone who's been a homeowner knows that often your house is not always a source of joy. A lot of times it can be a source of grief because things are breaking, things need to be fixed. Things aren't what they seemed when you bought it. So, we often have those sources of joy that are earthly, that belong to this world. But if our joy is centered in all that is just, now that's not wrong to find joy in the things that God has given to us. He's given us a lot of blessings here on earth. But if all those expected joys that we have are just earthly, those are unreliable, and those are going to let us down. And so those will also bring us grief. That goes the same way with children. Though children aren't earthly in that sense, there are things that we have here on earth, right? Our kids. There's an expectation versus the reality in children. Now, the birth of children is typically a joyful event, isn't it? You have that. We celebrate, people are having, even now we celebrate like the gender reveal. What's the gender? Which is kind of weird in our world that people are doing gender reveals, and then we have so many people who are questioning whether you can know what your gender is at all, But I approve the gender reveal because they're saying, hey, this is a boy, this is a girl, this is the gender of the child, and we're stating it before the child is even born. I'm all for that. But it should be a joy when you have a child, and it's a joy for even those who aren't followers of God, who aren't wise. The fool rejoices in a child that is born as well. And so usually it's a joyful event, sometimes because of birth defects or just the situation that people are in. They're not as joyful, but usually that's how it is. But many children end up being sources of grief rather than joy for their parents. Instead of bringing comfort in their old age or bringing comfort even in their younger age, some children bring additional pain and disappointment. So even as you get older, you see that these children bring this grief, this pain and disappointment. When you're hoping that your child will be able to get married and move out and have grandkids, and they'd be able to establish themselves and establish their own families and start growing their family, and you get to see that's a joy. But that doesn't always happen. Some kids throw all that they have away and never come back, and so you can see that they can bring pain, they can bring disappointment. You hope that they would do well, that they'd be able to survive on their own without you. That's the goal, right? That's the hope, that they be mature and know what they're doing. So, but that doesn't always happen. So what's the impact of a foolish child on a parent? Well, a parent of a fool is robbed of joy, either from the child or any other aspect of life, right? So a foolish child deadens all pleasures and amplifies every distress for their parent. Such a child despises their parent, bringing deep sorrow. Foolish children cause their own future misery as well as their parents. So to parent a fool here, it's not just the fact that the child is, you're upset about the child, but a lot of times that can cause problems in other aspects of life. Your marriage, for instance. Where a marriage should be bringing you joy, maybe it was until your child turned out to be a complete fool. And now that's a struggle. Your relationship with other children. A lot of times relationships are hurt because you have a foolish child. Your friends, family members, you have struggles with that. So it begins to, a child that's a fool begins to, those consequences kind of creep in to a lot of different areas of life. Because then you might be just thinking about your child all the time. You're praying about your child all the time, and it's hard, and you're worried, and you don't want to be worried. You know, God says don't be anxious about anything, but that's what you are because your child is doing foolish things. And so it just kind of brings a misery, and it kind of robs people of joy altogether. And so that's what a child can do to you. A child who is foolish kind of deadens the pleasures of life that we should have, that God has given to us. But yet, that foolish child begins to rob those things from us. So a child that is like this despises their parents. They hate their parents. Even though their parent brought them life, they're despising them, which is really sad, because that's not how it should be. And also that child then is really just creating their own future problems. So if they're acting like a fool, they only create their own problems. And my kids worked at a local fast food place with a bunch of, I would say, children that fit into this. They were fools. They were not wise. They did not fear the Lord, and they acted foolishly. They made horrible decisions with their lives. And so they didn't realize that not only are they bringing future misery to their parents, but they're the cause of their own future misery, right? So they're not only causing misery for their parents, but they're really setting themselves up to have a horrible life just because they're making foolish decisions all the time. And they're like, oh, all this drama, and I was like, why are you choosing to live this way? Well, that's what foolish children do. They choose to live in such a way that makes their life miserable. They could choose a different life. It's possible. They're not being forced to do these things. God's not forcing them to make these decisions, but that's what they're doing. They're acting according to their will, actually, which is foolish, sinful, and so you see that playing out. Now, do they have to be as foolish as they are? No, they can make better decisions, even as a fool. A fool doesn't have to be as foolish as one can be, right? We talked about sinful depravity. We don't have to be as sinful as we can be. People have a choice. They can choose not to be as sinful. They will be sinful, but they don't have to be so extremely sinful. They can make better choices. And it doesn't require regeneration to make better choices as a fool, to be less foolish. But obviously you can't please God by being a fool. But you don't have to be as bad as one can be. That's all I'm saying. I think that plays out in Scripture. You have some people that are foolish, and you have some people that are really foolish, and they're just making dumb choices. That's what they're doing. So let's move over to the responsibility of parents, though. Here, it's unwise for parents to place their hope for comfort solely in their children. You see this. People do this. They they have kids, or they hang their whole marriage on children too, which is a bad thing to do as well. So it's, children are a joy, but if you place all your hope and all your future and everything else on your children, that is putting them on a pedestal that they shouldn't be on. You can turn them into an idol. A lot of times people turn them into an idol. Like, oh, I got to run them here, here, and here. What do you want, child? And they're always asking the children what they want to do. It's always this elevating these children up, and they're placing all their hope on their children. Well, they're going to disappoint you. They're going to let you down. And, some people live vicariously through their children. It's like, well, that's not what we should be doing. That's putting them in the wrong place, and they shouldn't be there. But we have to remember, instead, these parents need to look to God, the Father lights, as the true source of blessing and joy. See, that's where you've made these children into an idol. Like God the Father, He's the Father of lights, through whom all blessings, all good things come. And that's where blessing and joy come from. Now, children can be a part of that, right? But if our source is them, not part of it, not an accompaniment of the joy that we get from God, then they can be a source of joy. The joy of the Lord can come through your children, sure. But if they're the object of your joy, they're the object of your hope, then you got a problem. There has to be God. God is your source of hope, and He can use the children to bring hope and joy and happiness into your life, but He can also allow them to bring grief and misery as well. So And sometimes he does that. If you idolize your children, if you made them something that is between you and God, then they might become fools just to discipline you. So, responsibly parents, don't place all your hope on them. Number 2, parents' affliction increases when they realize they were careless in correcting and guiding their children. They may reflect on their failure to pray for the blessing that ensures the success of their efforts. See, people look back and say, well, oh man, maybe I could have done this. Maybe I could have tried harder. Maybe I could have done that. And so that's where it increases, right? They look back and, oh, I was wrong in doing that. Oh, God can forgive us of our failure to do what we're supposed to do. If we didn't follow God's wisdom and we tried to raise them according to the world's standards or our own ideas, God can forgive us of that. But that does bring misery, right? It does bring that kind of shame, like, oh, sorry, Lord, I failed at this. And that is a danger. And that should be a concern of ours, that we are raising our children in a way that honors the Lord, and then we're raising them correctly. And so if we look back and say, well, I didn't do anything for them, I barely even took them to church, then that's a problem. That's something to be sad over and to mourn over and to seek repentance of. Like, you're never too late. You can be 90 years old and your children can be in their 70s, and you can still share the gospel with them. You can still say, hey, I don't have much time probably on this world. You need to hear this and teach them. So it's never too late, and there's always hope. So another set of, so we have the first thing where they bring grief. What else do children do? Well, they also despise their parents by committing crimes against them, bringing them ruin, it says. Proverbs 15:20. Here's another set of Proverbs here. I got 3 more. Proverbs 15:20 says, a foolish man despises his mother. So a foolish man is despising his mother. 19:13 says, a foolish son is ruin to his father. So you have despising, and then you have this idea of ruin, bringing ruin to his father. And then 13 verses later, in 19:26, it says, he who does violence to his father and chases away his mother is a son who brings shame and reproach. This is what a fool does. He brings violence and he chases his mother away. So some children perform outright criminal acts against their father or against their parents, right? We know this. We've seen this. We've seen them murder their parents. We've all heard of the stories of abuse at the hands of children. We've heard elderly abuse, and that's why we have that term nowadays, is elder abuse, because some parents do that. They rob their parents or manipulate their parents to get what they want. Some children just dump their elderly parents off at the hospital and lie about how they're doing just so they can not have to watch their parent, and they can go off and do whatever they want. They can go on vacation or something. They can take the day and not have to be the caregiver anymore. So they just drop their parents off at the hospital and say, well, they're not doing well. And, and that's what they do. And so, that's what a foolish, that is maybe not criminal act, but it definitely is a horrible thing to do. And what else they do? They rob their parents, right? They steal money from them. They manipulate the parents to get what they want. That is evil. Shouldn't be manipulating your parents just to get what you want. So foolish children despise and disrespect their mothers. Some children will respect their fathers out of self-interest, but disrespect their mothers, or vice versa. They'll play one parent off the other. They'll squander all that their mother has given them and pay no regard to them at all. They'll just take whatever. Remember the story of Esau? He had little regard for his mother's feelings. Like his mother loved Jacob, but he didn't care. He wanted to kill him. He's like, I'm going to kill this dude. Yeah, mom loves him, but that's why I'm going to kill him. To kill something that your mother loves. That's evil, right? That's a man who's evil. His soul is dark, it's black, and like that your mom loves this person, and you're like, I'm going to kill him. Even if it isn't, that's jealousy, that's evil. That how bad is that? You're despising your mother. You hate your mother. So your own jealousy is you're willing to kill something that your mother loves. That's bad. God commands children to honor their parents, right? Placing this duty just after the obligations to himself. He says in the 10 Commandments, honor the Lord and do all these things, keep the Sabbath holy. And then what's the very first one next is to honor your father and mother. So those who neglect or subvert their duties will face God's severe judgment. Injuring parents is more grievous than harming strangers or inferiors, making an offender subject to greater punishment. That's what God said in the law. Like if you accidentally harm a stranger or you hurt one of your slaves or an inferior, then yeah, you have to make retribution. But if you hurt your mother and father, then you die, right? It was capital punishment. It's capital punishment for rebelling against and being a grief and harming, beating your parents. That was equal to death. But if you harm a stranger, that's you have to pay retribution, but you're not going to die. If you harm an inferior, you're not going to die. You have to make retribution. You have to make that right, but you don't die for that. But if you are a foolish child and if you kill your parents, well then obviously you're going to die because that's murdering. That was the death penalty in the law. But even for rebellion against them, you can rebel against strangers and not die, but you can't rebel against your parents and not die. So that's how much God was placing into, it should be our thoughts as well, not just Israelites, but our thoughts as well. Like if I go against my parents in this way, if I dishonor my parents in this way, then I should die. That would be a just, that's what God is saying. That would be a just punishment for that. All that God's, that's what he's saying. Those are just punishments. Now, is there another just punishment? I don't know. We can debate that. But that's at least one, right? Because God said it was. So we have to see that the foolish child can be a horrible thing in the life of a parent and cause all kinds of destruction and problems. We've seen that. There's like Esau, and there are those instances where children are like this. Quite often they are like this, and it is a grief. It's sad, and so whatever we can do. This kind of leads into like our training of children. Whatever we can do as a parent, we're not in charge of their salvation, obviously, but whatever we can do to assure that we've brought them to the Lord over and over again as often as we can, and that God has the opportunity to use us to bring salvation to these kids and to train them up, even if they're fools, to train them not to be as foolish as they possibly can, but to train them to be respectful, to train them to not be a complete and utter fool, and thereby ensure that we're going to be miserable for the rest of our lives. Let's not do that. All right, so that's the end of our study for today. Next time we'll look at the wise children and take a look at some passages on that. So come back next time.